More and more, I've come to understand that listening is one of the most important things we can do for one another. Whether the other be an adult or a child, our engagement in listening to who that person is can often be our greatest gift. This quote was once said by Pittsburgh's own Fred Rogers, otherwise known as Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. This was a show that I feel truly was created for children and with children in mind. At a young age, my parents divorced and I was unsure how I would handle my emotions. I was a quiet little girl, in which case I often kept to myself and played with my Barbies in my room. There were a couple of instances when I was having a sleepover at a friend's house where I was first exposed to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Although I was not a frequent viewer, I took mental notes of the things Mr. Rogers and his puppets had taught me. I felt like Fred was my real neighbor and a friend that would always be there for me. He taught me that it is completely acceptable to express my emotions when necessary, and above all, Mr. Rogers told me that I was a special person. He helped to give me self-worth, which I carry proudly to this day at the age of 22. As I continue to grow, I fall progressively more in love with the idea of our neighborhood and forming bonds with my peers about our memories with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I hope to one day be as good of a neighbor as Mr. Rogers once was to me, and as Mr. Rogers once said, "Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor?"
In the early 80s, I had a television production company here in Pittsburgh, and we served broadcast and corporate clients around the world. At that time, Mr. Rogers was doing all of his location work on film, and he decided that his production company decided they wanted to go to video. So they came to me and said, "Would you do this project in and around Pittsburgh?" Well, we did, and it expanded to around the world. Actually, we did, every time Mr. Rogers went to someplace out of the neighborhood, he went with me and my crew. And we got to go to Moscow, we got to go to factories, we went and did projects with Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, and it was a great experience. And it went on for about 12 years.
Well, my background is in theater. I worked at the Pittsburgh Playhouse and studied there. I took a very intensive course in theater, and then I went to the University of Pittsburgh and finished in theater and in English Lit. But at the Playhouse, I worked everything in theater. I was the stage manager, I was teaching children, I was in the children's plays, and I was the host of the children's theater, and I played a clown, and his name was Bimbo the Clown, which you couldn't do today, but then Bimbo was all right. So I had a mutual friend who knew Fred Rogers, and he called me, of all places. I was in London in 1967 visiting my cousin, and I got actually a telegram saying that Fred Rogers was going to start the national version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Up to this point, it had been local or regional. And to make a long story short again, I met with Fred when I came back to the States, and he hired me after about an hour. And he said, "The job that I want you to do is be in charge of all of the props, the costumes, dress the puppets, make sure everything is right." He said, "But I also want you to do the part of a delivery man, because I will have to bring the props in each time. There'll be a knock on the door, and then you can bring it in. It'll open up the program a little bit." So that's how Mr. McFeely began. And I'll show you a little bit of the costume. This is, I wore a hat like this, something like that, and I put glasses on, something like this, and I was Mr. McFeely, Speedy Delivery. I'll show you a picture. Here is the picture of me as Mr. McFeely, and I was the delivery man in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood for all those many years. So that's McFeely. This is one of the hats I used, and these are my civilian glasses, but they look like that. So that's how Mr. McFeely began. I thought I had a job for 1 year, and here I am 45 years later, something like that.
At the time I was doing Mr. Rogers' location work, I had a daughter, Katie, and she grew up really knowing Fred Rogers as a friend. And what was funny was when she entered school and we went for a teacher's report, we asked if there was, they said she was brilliant and articulate and doing things, and we said, "Is there anything negative?" And they said, "She has trouble separating fact from fiction." And my wife and I looked and said, "What? Give us an example." And she said, "Well, she was telling us the other day about her friend, Mr. Rogers." And we try to explain to her that he's not a real person, he's a television neighbor. And she insists that he's a real friend. Concurrently, I was doing location work for The Young and the Restless, a soap opera for CBS, and Fred was all interested in about the soap opera stars. Coincidentally, when I was working with the soap opera stars, they'd say, "What's Mr. Rogers really like?"
Well, I think people have different perceptions of Fred. I think if you're looking at Fred on television, some adults don't quite understand the program because it's very deliberate. It moves very slowly, and it could be, to adults' perceptions, a little boring. But it's not. Fred has thought this program out so carefully, and he designs it for a preschool child from, I'd say, 2 to 3 up to about kindergarten or first grade. That's the audience for the program. But if adults watch it for a while with their children, that's very crucial, watching it with a child, they see what Fred is doing eventually.
One of the things I remember that's very special about Fred Rogers is that when we finished a project, he would write a personal handwritten note to everybody that was involved in the crew. And I just can't imagine the amount of time that he would spend on these personal notes. And he would always end it with a note about our family, because he was very appreciative that we all had families, and when we went on the road a little bit, we'd be away from the families, and families were very important to Fred. When we would go on location and Fred would meet different people, the first question he would say would be, "Tell me about yourself."
Tell me about yourselves.
Because he really was interested in who he was talking to. And when he was talking to somebody, he would look that person in the eye, and you could tell that he really was interested in what that person was telling him. I experienced that myself. We all know what Fred Rogers did on broadcast television, but there was so much he did behind the scenes that wasn't broadcast. And the American Cancer Society funded a project for him to do a video that would be given to families who first learned that their child had cancer. So we went around the country and talked to parents whose children had cancer, some of them who lost their children through cancer. And Fred was so comforting and caring to these people. And I remember we were in San Diego, and we were talking to a family whose child had cancer. And they said, "When are you leaving? When are you going back to Pittsburgh?" And he said, "We're leaving tomorrow afternoon." And they said, "Would you worship with us tomorrow at our church?" He didn't hesitate for a second. He said, "Yeah, tell me the name of the church, what time, and I'll be there." And he did. That's what he would do. And he did a lot of stuff without a publicist, without cameras, and every week he would make a tour through Children's Hospital without a camera, without a publicist, and he would go in and just talk to people.
And so the perceptions over the years have varied. But as the years went on, I think people understood what Fred was talking about, and it became an iconic program, and it's still on. It is still online, and a lot of public stations carry it on the weekends. We also do a lot of little programs. We did a program that was a DVD, actually, about the crying child. A lot of babies cry, and that's how a lot of child abuse begins. And we design helpful DVDs like that. But we also have started another program. The legacy continues with Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is on public television every day currently, and we're beginning a second season of that. And it is in 25 countries now. So we're bridging out, and the neighborhood is expanding. And at the same time, the legacy is carrying on, and I'm still very much moving around, making speedy deliveries around the country, visiting public stations. And I do a lot of talking to senior citizens now whose children and grandchildren grew up with the program. So I'm now working on the other end of the spectrum. So, and it's very rewarding. And I never thought when I met Fred in 1967 that I'd be sitting here today telling you all about this. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I guess I've never worked a day in my life because I love what I've done so much over the years. And working with Fred Rogers was a pure pleasure. And I feel I have a doctorate degree in child development working with him all these many years. And my advice to anybody watching this video is, if you have a chance to watch Fred Rogers or read a book by Fred or a DVD that we've produced, I think you'll learn a lot about children. People say, what can you do for children? And I think the best thing you can do for children is listen. Listen to what they're saying. Just listen.
Mr. Rogers once said, as human beings, our job in life is to help people realize how rare and valuable each one of us really is. That each of us has something that no one else has, or ever will have. Something inside of us that is unique to all time. It's our job to encourage each other to discover that uniqueness and to provide ways of developing its expression. I can't begin to express how this quote captures my everyday thought. I aspire to be someone who makes a difference in the world. Mr. Rogers taught me that it's best to just be me, and that's exactly what I plan to do. Meeting David Newell and Jerry Hughes has been one of the most wonderful and exciting opportunities I have ever stumbled upon. These two people, along with many other members of the neighborhood of Make-Believe, will forever carry the neighborhood beauty in their hearts. As a viewer, I hope to do the same and share it with those I come in contact with. I hope to encourage my future students using a persona similar to these three outstanding characters. Between Jerry and David, they have this sort of glow within their persona. I felt comfortable with the two of them, as if they were truly my neighbors. They made me feel that I had been talking to someone I had known my entire life. And best of all, I restored my sense of self-worth that I once received from Mr. Rogers. Jerry, David, and the deceased Mr. Rogers are some of the most amazing people in which I aspire to be like someday. They will forever hold a place in my heart, and whoever is watching this, I hope you keep an open mind and are just as influenced as I was.
Would you just take, along with me, 10 seconds to think of the people who have helped you become who you are? Those who have cared about you and wanted what was best for you in life. 10 seconds of silence. I'll watch the time. Whomever you've been thinking about, how pleased they must be to know the difference you feel they've made. You know, they're the kind of people television does well to offer our world. Special thanks to my family and friends and to my co-workers in public broadcasting, family communications, and this academy for encouraging me, allowing me all these years to be your neighbor. May God be with you.